Unconventional Life. Welcome back to the set. This is your host, Jules Schroeder, tuning in from Tucker, Colorado. On today's segment, I've got Jack Delosa from Sydney, Australia in the house. Jack, are you ready to take us down the path less traveled?
Absolutely, Julia. So good to be here. Thank you for including me.
Awesome. So Jack is a contributing author for 3 Billion Under 30, which we've heard from several others along with this summit. But he's also the founder and CEO of Australia's largest education institution for entrepreneurs called the Entourage, which helps entrepreneurs starting and building companies. And I think you guys have around 300,000 members at this point, which is just awesome. He's also got the #1 best-selling book in Australia. It came out in the first week, which is Unwritten, and is a figure in changing education. So for those listening that want to learn more about entrepreneurship, more about doing things a little unconventionally, and more about the other side of the world, as in Australia, make sure to pay attention to today's segment. Jack, welcome to the summit. Fill in any gaps that I might have left out and give us a glimpse into your personal life.
Yeah, well, my personal life. I my business career started at 5, I suppose. My parents ran a not-for-profit organisation, and they'd take long-term unemployed youth off the street and they'd put them into, through workshops and education programs, and they'd place them into employment. So from a very young age, education, I decided that education would be my life's work. And I think that, culturally still today, we underestimate just how formative and how impactful education, and particularly the education system, is on up-and-coming generations. I think the education system plays a huge part in moulding and forming upcoming generations. So, while that's always been at my heart, I suppose I always knew I needed to be an effective creator and an effective entrepreneur in order to do anything worthwhile in education. So, started my first business at 18 and stuffed it up, and started the second one and it went all right, and started the third one and it went really well. And now Entourage is my 4th one. We've got an investment fund and another company that does training with corporates, and Entourage, its core business is, Australia's largest education institution for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I love that. So Australia, we've got people tuning in from all over the world, but primarily, it's been seen, I've spent a lot of time in New Zealand and Australia, that Australians are behind the curve in terms of how the US is in entrepreneurship. So it's been said. And I would love your insight on that and what you think about that and how you've really been able to be such a large figure for the movement of entrepreneurship in Australia.
Yeah, well, it's true. Let me say that, company startup rates are higher in the US. Culturally, entrepreneurship and success is more celebrated in the US than it is out here. And I think from an ecosystem perspective, particularly when you talk about, volume and quality of companies being started, the investment that's invested into early stage ventures, and potential acquirers in terms of businesses acquiring, businesses, early stage businesses when they reach the medium to largest size. The ecosystem is far more developed and far more sort of prosperous over in the States. And, honestly, I'd say Australia is probably 10 years behind in all of that. So, and I suppose that's part of what we try to do with the Entourage, is just accelerate people's adoption of quality entrepreneurship, and starting and building businesses that have substance.
Yeah, totally. I appreciate the candid response to that and just kind of the in-depth of it. And I almost imagine, as you said, it started at 5 with your parents, and what it must have been like if we were a fly on the wall in, who you were as a young person, say middle school, high school, early on. But beyond the entrepreneurship elements of, your background, who were you growing up? Were you kind of like the quiet kid? Were you the sports jock? Were you outgoing? Were you reserved? What kind of human being would we have seen if we knew you back then?
You'd have seen a highly rebellious young man. My parents to this day talk about my 4th grade report card that you get. The teacher called me a lovable rogue. And I think my parents say that to this day because they still believe it's true, but perhaps they're the only ones that believe that's the lovable part anyway.
Yeah, nice. And so how did you kind of navigate your way? Did you know that entrepreneurship, you kind of always knew it, I'm going for that, that's something I want? Or in the rebellion, was that unclear? Or how was that for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, as I said, I sort of always knew that I wanted to do something in education. Mainly, well, it started with, my experience at a very young age with what my parents were doing. And then just my own experience going through education. I think entrepreneurial style people, like probably everybody watching this right now, if we're sort of like square pegs in round holes going through the traditional academic education system. And so just from my own experience, I recognized at a young age that I wanted to do something to influence that. I never really knew how, right? But I think what steered me toward entrepreneurship is the question I was asking was, how does one influence change in the world? And so at a very young age, I thought I wanted to become a politician, right? Like if you had found me at, 16, while I was highly rebellious and doing all sorts of naughty things, there was this part of me that would go home and watch like Michael Moore documentaries and, read about politics because for me it was just always about influence, right? And then the more I researched who influences change in the world, the more I realized that it's not really politicians. Politicians help regulate the change that happens, but very rarely, governments help regulate the change that happens. Very rarely do they instigate or catalyze change. And through researching all sorts of sort of change makers that have come over the last sort of 2,000 years, I identified that typically it was entrepreneurs and innovators that drove change. And so that's why I was drawn to that path, because it was all about how do you make the world a better place. Which, Julia, can I just say, I don't think that's how noble of Jack. The reason I say that is because what I've found, I speak to, probably 15, 20,000 entrepreneurs a year, right? And we've got a large community of entrepreneurs. And so I've got a fairly good gauge on the sort of psychographics and what's going on in the hearts and minds of up and coming generations of entrepreneurs. And what I've found is that this generation, when I say generation, I don't necessarily mean by age, but more by stage. Like people who are starting businesses today, regardless of what age, according to my observation and some of the consumer research that we do here in Australia, less and less people are going into business today because they want to be the next Warren Buffett, right? It's less about being a billionaire, and it's more about, three core things. Number one, I want to do something that's meaningful to me. Number two, I want to do something that contributes, and I feel that it touches people's lives or it makes the world a better place in some way, shape, or form. And thirdly, I want to be able to contribute to the people around me. And so I think entrepreneurship today, and this is, I'd be interested to get your view whether this is true in the States or not. But what we've sort of observed in Australia is it's less about becoming the next billionaire and more about, I want to do something that's meaningful to me, meaningful to the world, and meaningful to the people around me.
Yeah, totally.
Is that true of what your observation over there?
I would say that that's very accurate. And I would say, especially for those that are listening, impact has become quite a word for sure. And also it's like starting an impact-based business is like another profession. As you know, with education, it's like, it's not like you go to university, you go to college and you're put into one of 13 tracks. It's entrepreneurship opens up like the infinite gateway. And I think that impact is, what drives, especially a lot of millennials. So
100%. It's cool. I like that trend.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit actually about the how. Here you are as a young person and you're like, okay, it's not politicians, it's these entrepreneurs, but you had no idea how to do it. And especially as you mentioned earlier, Australia being a little bit, being behind in the realm of education in this. How did you learn about entrepreneurship?
Jules, I'm loving these questions. Can you just sort of cutting to the very core of each of my sort of the really pivotal points throughout my life? And again, it's a really important question because I think it points to an important point, which is, and the point speaks to why things like what you are doing right now is really important. So how did I even come across entrepreneurship? I had a girlfriend.
It all starts with a lady.
It always starts with a lady. And she had her dad. Okay, let me start this up. She had, unknown to me when I started dating her, her father and therefore her family were very wealthy. And so I remember walking into a house, and I didn't know. And so I remember walking into a house for the first time. And there was this, massive, massive house. And my family were never well off. We never didn't have anything that we needed, but we certainly weren't well off. And so I'm walking in, and it looked like a hotel, the side. And so I sort of walked into this house, and it was sort of wealth to the level that I'd never seen before. And I started thinking to myself, wow, Ash's parents must be really good accountants or really good lawyers or really good doctors, because that's what you think when you go to a traditional school and you haven't seen much else. And then I met a father, I met a mother, and they were opinionated. They had a spark. They were childlike. They weren't childish. They were childlike. They had an energy about them. And up until that point in my life, I'd never seen an image of an adult that I wanted to emulate. I just always associated growing up with sort of going into an era of boredom. And the way Ash's parents would conduct themselves, they were excited and they were passionate and they had views, and they spoke a different language. They spoke about miracles and they spoke about making it. And it was just I go, wow. And then when I learned more about her father in particular, who became quite a formative figure for me, he wasn't an accountant. He wasn't a lawyer. He didn't even finish high school. He'd gone out, he dropped out of high school and he'd become like a laborer for a few years, and then he decided he wanted to do something with his mind. And so he started a business, and ultimately, the long story short, 10 years later, he sold the business for about $110 million. And so Rod, who was Ash's father, was the first example of any role model, if you like, that I actually wanted to emulate. And so it was sort of just through osmosis and through hearing Rod on the phone and seeing how he lived his life, I go, that's what I want to do, right? And this was, this is sort of 15 years ago. Yeah. And so it comes back to my original point, which is the reason this stuff's so important. And part of the reason, I wanted to start the Entourage 7 years ago, was for that reason. Often we only need to see one, Rod, we only need to see one role model, particularly on a summit like this, where your audience is probably going to see, 37 speakers or something like that. That's what catalyzes people to go, okay, if they can do it, I can do it, and hopefully I can learn some stuff on the way through it. Yeah.
Oh, Rod. Sounds like quite a gentleman. Were you with her for very long, or did you get to spend a lot of time with him?
So Ash and I were together probably 3 years, but we sort of, Ash and I and Rod and I stayed sort of friends for a very long time after that as well. So yeah, but it was right when I was probably 14 to 17, 18, right? So right in those sort of teenage developmental years.
Yeah.
So it was very formative.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, you talk to 20,000 entrepreneurs, a year that you're impacting, and you started the Entourage 6-7 years ago. What do you notice is missing for most people that are wanting to move into entrepreneurship or that are early in entrepreneurship? And knowing what you know now from the successes that you've had with these different ventures, what shortcut do you or might you provide for those that are starting out or early in their career?
Yeah. I think in terms of what's missing, I think the biggest or the most common mistake that we see is early stage entrepreneurs spreading themselves too thin and trying to do too much too early, right? An entrepreneur's biggest strength is that we love to pursue opportunity. An entrepreneur's biggest weakness is that we love to pursue opportunity. And so, we've all been guilty of it, particularly in the early years, where, you start something and then you get excited by something else, you get excited by something. And so we start trying to be all things to all people. And that might be, diversifying massively within a business, or it might be trying to start 2 or 3 businesses at the same time, or whatever the case may be. The number one ingredient that I think attributes to the success of early stage ventures is focus, right? Pick one thing and try and become the best in the world at it. And then, often once you've nailed that one thing, which can take let's be real, that can take 5 or 10 years, there's no, in my view, there aren't any real shortcuts, right? So let's say it takes 5 or 10 years to really wedge yourself into a market, get a position of market leadership, let's say over the United States or across the globe or whatever the case may be, right? Unless you're a Facebook or an sometimes looking at those kind of outliers can be a bit disheartening for, most of the people that are in business that are moving a little bit slower. So let's say it takes 5 or 10 years to really build a foothold and really build a wedge into the market, become known for one thing and become the best in the world at one thing. Then you can sort of start to diversify a little bit. But I think the number one thing that's important for those starting out is really focus in on one objective, one goal, one function. It's not to say you won't iterate and change along the way, because you have to, right? We're all familiar with the lean startup and Eric Ries and, being able to adapt and flex according to consumer feedback and consumer insight. But we should be iterating according to one objective, not sort of having 5 or 6 objectives on the go in the first couple of years.
Yeah, totally. So I have a high value on things being in alignment. I mean, this summit is all about living a life on fire, where every area of your life is fulfilled in alignment. It feels like effortless, on purpose. And so when you started the Entourage, was that this for you? Like when you were starting it off, was it one of those like, wow, like something's resonating and just following it? Or what was your relationship to it when you first started out?
Yeah, really good question. Yes, it was. That's exactly what it was for me. My first business was a business-to-business call center, right? I hated call centers. Oh, the least sexy. You should see The Office. It was even less sexy. Not sexy and not fun, right? And the only reason I started the business call center is because I've been working in call centers my whole teenage years, so I hated them by the time I was 18. But then, my bosses left and wanted to start their own thing. And then I reached out to them and they said, well, why don't we start this together? And so then we started it together. But it was just like, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I knew I wanted to be somebody that could influence. I knew I needed credibility. I knew I needed a financial foundation, which I certainly didn't have. I knew I needed some reputation. I knew I had a lot to learn. And so and this is the other thing, is I don't think that early stage entrepreneurs should wait for all of the ducks to align, right? I hated call centers, but I wanted the experience of running a business, and so I went and did that. And then my second company was in education. I enjoyed that. Then my third company was more in like, we would help small to medium enterprises in Australia raise money from investors, acquire businesses and sell businesses. So it's kind of like investment banking, but at a sort of small to medium-sized business level. And again, like, while I found that commercially fascinating and intellectually stimulating and actually really did enjoy it, I always knew my life's work was going to be in education, but I needed to become the person who was capable of building an effective, sustainable education institution before I sort of stepped onto that path. That's the way I took it anyway. So, so starting the Entourage was me sort of coming full circle and going, okay, I've now got the financial foundation that I sought, and the network and the credibility and a bit of a profile. And so I can now use all of these sort of things to coalesce into launching what was always most important to me.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I asked that question. I started my first company at 18, next one at 21, and had a series of them. And it wasn't actually until this recent one where I really felt that full-bodied resonance of like, yes, this is it. And I think sometimes as early entrepreneurs, there's this pressure that you have to find or start 100%. The company that's like, in line with the passion, the purpose, and all that jazz. And I'd be curious your thoughts on that and that pressure, and if there's any advice you might give in that.
Yeah. It's. I think for me, my overarching principle to most things is that there are no rules, and the only rule that I carry is whatever is important to you needs to be important to you. And that might sound really obvious, but what I mean by that is, if you want to run businesses to make money, that's awesome. If you want to run businesses to have an impact, that's awesome. If you want to have a small lifestyle business, that's awesome. If you want to have the next massive $1 billion company, that's awesome. We need to sort of take away the judgment or the criteria or the filters that we view opportunities through. And it's like, so I think from an early stage entrepreneur's perspective, it's about cancelling out all of the noise and all of the opinions from the outside world and go, what's most important to me? What do I want my life to be about? Am I a lifestyle business kind of a person, or am I a take over the world and contribute on a global scale kind of a person, right? I'm more over here. A lot of my students in my community are more over here, right? And so I think ultimately it's about going, what kind of person are you? What's most important to you? And because some people, to specifically answer your question directly, some people will only want to run a business that they're passionate about. And so they might start a business in the early days that they're passionate about. Other people might just want to become a really great entrepreneur for whatever reason. And then they'll take whatever commercial opportunities come in front of them because they're on this kind of medium to long-term developmental path. And so it's really the most important thing, like, you know, according to Jack, in life and business is stop for 5 minutes, sit in a room, or in your case, Jules, out in the snow in Colorado, you know, take half an hour, you know, I take 3 days every few months, and like journal and just shut out all the noise and do it by yourself. And, you know, meditate if that's your thing, but really connect with self and tap into what's true for you, and then build your life and your future path according to that.
Yeah.
And it will change.
Yeah. So what do you do as a practice? Do you have something like, I know there's this huge, I don't know if it's big in Australia, but in the States, it's all about the morning routine. And it's like having this like picture perfect routine that you do every single day. I actually hate routines. I'm not a morning person. I'm like the least structured gal around.
Yeah. No, you know, and that's again, really good question. But that's exactly what that was to my point earlier, you know, like, and like a lot of these blogs, you know, like do these 7 things every morning in order to become successful, right? Well, that work, who did that work for? You know, and well, it worked for that routine works for Obama. And then you go, okay, well, Obama has this body type. He has this sleeping pattern. He has this job. He enjoys this. He grew up in this environment. His parents made him wake up at this time. You know, like there's all these inputs that go into why that works for Obama, right? And then there's all the inputs that go into why structure doesn't work for Jules and Jack, right? And so I don't have a morning routine, but again, if you're a routine person that was served by a morning routine, do it, but don't sort of believe the blogs that say do these 7 things every morning and you will be successful. Fuck that. It's like what's true for you. Do that.
Yeah, nice. All right, so
Sorry, Jules, I swear.
No, it's good. It's good. You're an Aussie. We'll allow it. So I want to talk about communities for a minute. And I know we've got a lot of people here that want to start communities, whether it's through events, whether it's online, etc. So how were you able to, I know it started 6 or 7 years ago, but if you kind of put yourself back in that place, how were you able to start the entourage? And I guess knowing what you know now, if you were to start a community today, what steps would you take to start a successful community?
I think it's really, really important to fully and deeply understand your audience, right? For me, I was fortunate because in the instance of the entourage, I am my audience in a sense in that, you know, I'm a young entrepreneur, and particularly back then I was a very young entrepreneur and still quite inexperienced. And I don't mean, you know, we're targeting females from 25 to 35 who live in Sydney, but because that's demographic stuff, right? And it's like, you know, if I know that Jules is between 25 and 35 and lives in Colorado, and that doesn't actually tell me anything about who you are. Like it might tell me a little bit, but it doesn't really tell me any of the important stuff, right? Like I want to know what frustrates my audience. I want to know what problems they have that they speak to their friends about. I want to know what problems they have that they don't speak to anyone about. I want to know what their biggest frustrations are in case of the entourage in starting businesses, and what are the fears and the reluctancies that hold them back. I want to know what their long-term fears are. I want to know what their wants are, what their immediate desires are. And I want to know what their dreams are. And I want to know why all of that forms. I just want to go deep into the hearts and minds of, you know, and this is true of any business, I suppose, into the hearts and minds of your target market or your audience, so that you can best speak to them, connect with them, market to them, sell to them, because if you don't market and sell to them, then they're not going to join any community, right? Educate them, so serve them and deliver to them, retain them, so continue to serve. That all stems from a position of being able to empathize deeply with your audience. And so, in my view, and this might sound a little sort of cliche, it's not meant to be, I actually mean it literally, you need to understand your consumer better than they understand themselves, right? I truly believe that, with you, Jules, you probably understand in fact, I'd say you definitely understand you're better than they understand themselves, right? When it comes to entrepreneurship and living a life that's unconventional and all of that, because you've obsessed about it, right? And so you can, I bet that sometimes you articulate things to people in your community and they go, fuck, that's true. I've never actually verbalized it like that, but you just said it better than I ever could, but you just verbalized how I felt, right?
Yeah.
Every great entrepreneur, that's I think that's the kind of foundation that everything else rests on. From there, I use PR a lot, so I use the media to build my brand and the brand of the organization. We use strategic partnerships a lot. I think from a practical, tactical standpoint, for the first 3 or 4 years of the Entourage, our number one thing was build the email database, build that community. Right, it was build the email communities. Number 2 was generate leads. Number 3 was make sales and all of that sort of stuff. And so we were always leading with build community, build audience. And so so that's your lead messaging on your website. That's your lead messaging on a lot of your advertisements. That's your lead messaging in your is just get people into a database, get people into a community. And so PR, strategic partnerships, purposefully and proactively developing a database, and obviously on social as well. But yeah, you'll only be able to do all of that sort of stuff if you truly understand who you're talking to.
Yeah, that's so good. So the email component specifically, because I think there's such this push, capture emails, capture leads, and then, you get them there, you get the email, and then it just dies, or it doesn't convert to sales eventually. And I think that's the relationship part. And obviously you've had some success with this. And so what do you feel is the secret to nurturing people once you've, gotten them to be on your email list, and how to actually make them from that point feel a part of something rather than just some solo independent homie or homegirl chilling behind their computer screen somewhere in the world?
Yeah. And so there's probably 2 different sides to that answer, right? So how do you make them feel like they belong to something? That's what I call sort of dynamics. And then how do you move them to a process? That's what I call mechanics, right? So in any business, and particularly, in any business, in any area of business, there's dynamics and there's mechanics. So if you take a business at large, the dynamics of the brand, the heartbeat, the culture, the essence, the soul, the feel, the DNA, all of that sort of stuff. And then the mechanics of the operations, the financial management, the technical, mechanical stuff, right? And so moving people through a journey like that, you need to be conscious of both. So from a dynamics perspective, in a marketing perspective, from a dynamics perspective, you need to speak to a higher ideal, right? And so you, Jules, you speak to leading an unconventional life, and you said something before that I loved, enabling people to live on fire.
Yeah.
Right? That's cool. The Entourage, our ideal is a kind of dissatisfaction with traditional education, and an ideal that anybody with the right commitment in the right environment can start and build a meaningful life and a meaningful business. Nike's ideal is that they advocate athletes, and their view is if you have a body, you're an athlete. And so their ideal, they speak to everyday greatness, right? There's greatness in every single person. All you need to do is put on your shoes and go for a run at 6 a.m. And that is the essence of greatness, right? And so great brands speak to a higher ideal. And once you know that ideal, that's what enables people to feel like they're a part of something, because your value set aligns with their value set and it forms a common conversation. Yeah. From a mechanics perspective, the nurturing stuff, it can get complex. I think understanding different consumer segments, and then have a process, like a funnel, if you like, a process that you move them through, and always be refining that process. So someone downloads an ebook, then they come to a webinar, then they do something else, and then they buy from you, whatever that might be. Always be looking at that process, always be looking at what are your conversion sort of figures from one step to the next, and refine, test, ask questions, When the conversions are down, change. When the conversions are up, think about and analyze and ask questions as to why. It's really about having that process and constantly refining it.
Yeah, awesome. So community specifically, there's a lot of them, right? Like there's more and more popping up all the time. And I love that part about, communicating exactly what it is that you're saying. So what makes you guys the largest in Australia? And in a lot of ways, I consider that like number one, right? And it might not necessarily be number one, but what are you doing differently that you feel is resonating? And what can someone maybe learn from the lead that you're taking?
Well, from a dynamics perspective, we genuinely stand for something, right? Like I believe I'm here to influence education, and so we've got a team of sort of 50 or 60 people here at the Entourage. Every single person here is values aligned, vision aligned. We truly care about demonstrating a more effective education model than what exists in the traditional models, and so that permeates out, right? When you have an organization that truly stands for something, people sense that. So from a dynamics perspective, that's it. From a mechanics perspective, we've always been the loudest, like we've always
Surprise.
I'm surprised you don't From a PR perspective, it's all, as I said, the first 4 or 5 years it was all about audience capture, right? So, and connecting with the audience. So it was heavily media driven, heavily partnership driven, heavily events driven for the sake of building a community. And when you're loud and you're genuine and you're authentic to that ideal that I was talking about earlier, people want to be a part of it.
Yeah, awesome. Last question before we move into the rapid fire on the last segment. In terms of education specifically, I know you're very passionate about changing it, reforming it. What do you wish more people could internalize or know about the way education is and what is actually available through education as a new ideal or a future possibility?
Yeah, it's hard right now in terms of, well, future possibilities, I think, are infinite, right? And I don't think it will be a fundamental change to the education system per se. I think it'll be outliers of different models that highlight to be more effective than the core model. And so any effective large-scale change, I think, will be led by example. It won't be led through regulative or bureaucratic change, if you like. What do I wish people realised about education? It's just backwards, We sort of sit there, don't talk, don't look or listen or talk to the person next to you, and then you come out into the real world and we go collaborate, and then we go, if someone's getting an A, a D, and a C, in school we kind of go, well, how do we get them all to be sort of B pluses? And then we come out of school and we go, what's your specialty? And then, we put people in an environment to do tests where, again, they're not allowed to talk to anybody next to them. They're not allowed to check their phone. They're not allowed to check their computer. And then people come out of school or university and we go, be resourceful. Traditional education just simulates an environment that just couldn't be more different from how the real world is today.
Yeah. So
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a slightly different question to that one, which I'm more interested in, is as entrepreneurs, like what role do you think we play in how our education is right now, and what power do you think we have as entrepreneurs in terms of education?
To lead by example and to be happy to do things like this, and to lead by example and share your journey in an authentic way where you're equally as happy to talk about your challenges and your failures and your losses as you are your milestones.
Yeah, awesome. All right, the rapid fire round, last segment of this show. Are you ready? A series of random questions.
So ready. I love this rapid fire thing.
All right, fill in the blank. Question number 1. If you really knew me, you would know what?
I have a dog called Bear.
Nice. Next question. What is the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
follow my advice exactly how I say it.
Next question, what is something in your life that you're really proud of?
The students that we've educated through the entourage.
Next question, if you could turn back the time to your 20-year-old self and look him in the eye and give him a piece of advice, what would you say to him?
I'd say you're going to follow a very non-traditional path. Conventional wisdom will disagree with you. The traditional way of thinking about life will disagree with you. When the voice inside your head is louder than the voices outside your head, that's when you've begun to master your life.
Oof, that was good. Bear. Bear does not look like a bear.
Looks like a teddy bear.
Yeah. I'm thinking like Bernie's mountain dog, like big Colorado dog.
Okay. Small bear. Yeah.
Okay, last question. What does living an unconventional life mean to you?
Living according to your own inner GPS system.
Nice. Awesome. Jack, I know you've got a giveaway for one of our listeners. Tell us about the giveaway.
Yeah, so my latest book, Unwritten, a large part of my life has been studying those sort of influenced the world that we live in and studying those that have changed the course of history forever and going, what are the lessons and the sort of principles that can be learned from their lives and the way they impacted, in some instances, millions of other people's lives that will enable us to live an unconventional life today. So this is the one you were mentioning in the intro. This was the #1 best-selling business book in Australia in its first week. And so we're giving that away.
Amazing. So details will be at the page below. You can also head over to unconventionallifeshow.com. And Jack, for those that want to learn about the entourage, want to stay in touch with you, learn more about what you're up to, where should they go?
Yeah, so just go to the-entourage.com.au.
Amazing. Well, Jack, thank you so much for joining us on the summit, Unconventional Life Family. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will have another segment coming at you shortly. Talk to you guys soon.